Is it possible for human beings to truly learn from their faults, their failings, and even their mistakes? Is it possible for us to learn? Some do, but in truth, some don't. Some catch on quickly, and others, unfortunately, keep repeating the same things for a while before it finally dawns on them that what happens to them is their own responsibility. They brought it on themselves. That certainly was true for our ancient Jewish ancestors. Isaiah, at the end of his long ministry, reflects on what has happened. The people had believed that somehow, because the temple was in Jerusalem, that they would be fine. They would say, the temple, the temple, the temple, that'll protect us. Nah. No, and the prophets told them that again and again. They needed to do what God had called them to do. And their failure to do that ended up in the temple being destroyed, the city being destroyed, and its inhabitants, at least most of them, were carried off into exile in the land of Babylon for 70 years. There they languished as almost slaves. And it was there that they said, how could this happen? Why did God let this happen? Oh, yeah, there were the prophets. Maybe it wasn't God. Maybe it was us that brought this on. Well, God, why didn't you do something? I mean, open the heavens, come down, be dramatic. Don't be quiet. Well, even if he had, would we truly listen? No. And finally, they come to this point where they say, it's our own fault. If we only listened to you, Lord, it would not have turned out this way. And they come to accept the responsibility for their own actions. And then they ask that they could just rest in God's hands, to be like clay in the hands of a potter, and ask God to shape them and mold them into the people they were meant to be. It is a powerful prayer. It really is. And it's one that I've kind of learned over the years, but, I have to be honest, it's not something that I've learned consistently. I am a slow learner, and so as a consequence, I keep finding myself in those places that I really shouldn't have gone to. And you know what? It's kind of like David. How long does it take for you to catch on? But slowly I have. And most of the time I try to rest in God's hands, to ask God to shape me, to shape my life the way he wants me to be. And one of the blessings that has come is moving back to Genesee County, actually. It's been very helpful to me. Because here on the southern end of Genesee County, I keep, when I go out to drive, encountering signs that point to Dixie Highway. And that was an important lesson for me. It really was. It's one that I'm now constantly reminded every time I see those signs, Dixie Highway this way. I remember. Back in 1967, when we lived in Flint, I came home from school and my parents told me that I was going to start driver's training on Monday. It was not something I wanted to do. But you could tell I had no choice at that point. And so on Monday, I appeared at Southwestern High School in Flint and began driver's training. And for those of us who are a little older, you will remember the fact that back in those days, driver's training took place on a track. There was this big track at the back of Southwestern High School, and there were streets painted on it, and there were parking places, there were real stop signs, real traffic lights. You could parallel or you could do the normal kind of angle parking. It was all there, and you learned that. And you learned it in brand new Buicks that had power everything. Nothing like my family had. And so it was one of those things, you learned it on that track, and you never went faster than 25 miles an hour. The first time I went out on the road was actually on the day I got my permit. My mom took me down to the police station downtown Flint, and I got my permit, and I came out, and my mother said, "You drive." Well, it's the first time I went over 25 miles an hour. And I got it up to 35 miles an hour, and as I was coming down Court Street, one of the things that I didn't realize, because we only went 25 miles an hour or less, is that it's a good thing to brake before you turn, just to slow down the car. And so my mother is sitting there, and God love her, Dave, you want to slow down? Dave, you want to slow down? Put the brake on. And I finally caught on, and, it turned out okay, but my mother would say that was responsible for more of her gray hairs, She'd always say, "I got these from you." My dad took me out on Sunday, and it was the first time I went out on the highway, and as you might have guessed, it was Dixie Highway. And so we went, and now I went 55 miles an hour. My first time. And I was white-knuckling it. I can still remember that, because what I was doing was watching the white line, and as the road curved, I was trying to make sure that I stayed with the white line. And my dad, who was probably also very nervous, but took a deep breath, and he finally realized what was going on. He said, Dave, you don't want to drive right where you're going. You want to look ahead to where you want to go. And just steer the car in that direction. And it made all the difference. Watch where you're going. Pay attention to that and steer in that direction, and you'll be fine. And it really was. I still remember that, and it's something that keeps coming back to me. It's interesting that in that short gospel passage, only 4 verses long, Jesus says 4 times, watch. Watch, watch, watch. Pay attention. Look at what you're doing. Because, when we stop paying attention, that's when we get into trouble. When we stop watching, that's when we fail. And so he just says, watch. We don't have to worry about when it's going to end. But in the meantime, pay attention, David, to what you're doing. Watch where you're going. Steer in the direction that you want to go. And that's the key, my sisters and brothers, the lesson of Dixie Highway. You and I are called once more at the beginning of Advent to remember where we're going, to remember who we are, to remember who we're supposed to be, to ask the Lord to shape us and mold us to become that people, that person that He intended. Be the potter. Let us be the clay. Shape us. But help us to be watchful. Help us to pay attention so that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past. Lord, help us to watch and to steer in the direction you want us to go. Amen.